You ever come home expecting peace and quiet, maybe a dusty welcome mat, a humming fridge, the soft creak of your own front door, and instead find your entire life being sold off on your front lawn by someone in too much beige and a weaponized smile? Yeah, me neither. Not until it actually happened. I'm Sergeant Alex Mason, United States Army. And this is the unfiltered, absolutely insane story of how my HOA president, a woman whose ambition outpaced both her decency and her legal authority, tried to auction off my house, my car, my furniture. Hell, probably even my lucky deployment toothbrush. She thought she'd hit the suburban jackpot. A quick flip. A power trip fulfilled. Spoiler alert. What she really triggered was a professionally trained, thoroughly pissed-off landmine in government-issued boots. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this isn't just a wild story. It's a masterclass in what happens when you pick a fight with someone who specializes in hostile environments. My deployment had been cut short. Nothing dramatic, just a training op that got cancelled early due to some logistical snafu on the host nation's end, combined with a minor knee twist during a final rappel. Not bad enough to keep me downrange, but just annoying enough for the medic to say, "Mason, pack it up. Go home before you make it worse." So I did. 3 months early. I hopped a flight, grabbed a cab, and landed stateside with my duffel bag, a half-healed limp, and a deep craving for silence, cold beer, and the creaky familiarity of my own couch. The cabbie, a cheerful guy named Saeed, was chatting about the weather as we pulled into my street, Maple Creek Lane. Usually calm. Predictable. The kind of place where birds chirp and sprinklers whisper. But as we rolled up to house number 227, his voice faltered. "You expecting a party, Sarge?" he asked, eyeing the crowd. "I wasn't," I said slowly. What I expected was stale air and maybe a stack of overdue mail. What I got was a full-blown yard sale from hell. My front lawn, usually pristine and neatly trimmed thanks to the landscaping company I paid in advance, was swarming. People everywhere. Strangers. Picking through my belongings like vultures at a buffet. There was my leather couch, sitting crooked near the curb, tagged with a neon sticker, Lot 37. My dining table, the one I'd eaten exactly one meal at before deploying, was being circled by a woman with a tape measure. And standing at the center of it all, like some over-caffeinated queen bee, was Karen Pendleton. Just Karen, if you know the type. In the world of Maple Creek HOA, she wasn't just the president. She was a one-woman bureaucracy, armed with passive aggression, bad PowerPoints, and a god complex big enough to block the sun. Today she was in full regalia, a beige pantsuit stretched to its limit, oversized sunglasses despite the gray skies, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. An auctioneer, slick, grinning, wired for sound, was warming up on the mic. "Next up, folks, gorgeous cherrywood coffee table. Practically brand new. We'll start the bidding at $50. I felt it then. Not just anger. Fury. Cold and quiet. The kind that starts in your spine and crystallizes behind your eyes. This wasn't just trespass. It was a violation. Of space. Of trust. Of everything I left behind to go surf. The cab fare was forgotten. I was out of the car before Saeed could even put it in park. My duffel hit the pavement with a thud. I moved forward, limping but locked in. The crowd parted around me, unsure whether I was lost or about to start something nuclear. And I was. Still in dusty boots, dusty uniform shirt, face unreadable and jaw clenched, I walked straight toward her. Karen looked up. Surprise flickered in her eyes, briefly, before it vanished behind that trademark smirk. Well, she said, voice as smug as her clipboard. "Look what the cat dragged in." She turned slightly as if playing to an audience. "Sergeant Mason, isn't it? You're a little off schedule. This is private HOA business." I stopped 2 feet from her. Leveled my voice. "Come. Quiet. Dangerous. Karen." "Yeah. Move." I might add, private HOA business? On my lawn? With my possessions? I kept my voice level, though every word came out wrapped in steel. There was a tremor of rage behind my ribs, but my training held it in check. Controlled. Focused. What in the seven hells do you think you're doing? Karen Pendleton, queen of beige and smug superiority, actually scared at me. Scared. Like I was a child caught tracking mud through her perfect little palace. Language, Sergeant, she said with a faux sweet smile. Then, with the casual cruelty of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this moment, she gestured broadly at my home. This property is under a valid HOA lien and scheduled for auction due to significant delinquency and, frankly, abandonment. It's all perfectly legal. All above board. Her smile wasn't just smug. It was gleeful. She thought she had won. That I'd come back too late. Delinquency? I had my HOA dues on autopay, from a dedicated deployment account used solely for domestic bills. Abandonment? Karen and the entire board had received official notice of my deployment, signed by my CO and including contact details for my rear detachment. I took a slow breath. Observe. Assess. Don't escalate. My eyes swept the scene, every detail like a gut punch. There sat my vintage Ducati Monster, uncovered, a sold sign taped to the windscreen. My Ford pickup, equally essential, tagged the same way. She dragged them from the garage like trophies. This wasn't overreach. It was predatory. You've made a monumental mistake, I said, my voice dropping into the cold register I usually reserved for interrogations. Karen's smirk faltered just slightly. The only mistake here, she snapped, was you thinking you could ignore your community responsibilities. The HOA has rules, Sergeant. Rules I intend to enforce. She puffed out her chest, practically daring me to argue. I raised my phone. That's interesting, Karen. Because I'm fairly certain there are also rules against grand larceny, fraud, and illegal eviction. Let's see what the local police think of your interpretation of community obligations. Her face lost its smugness like a balloon deflating in real time. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. This is an official HOA proceeding. Too late. I was already dialing. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I said, locking eyes with Karen, who now looked like someone had pulled the pin on a grenade and handed it to her. This is Sergeant Alex Mason. I've just returned to my home, 227 Maple Creek Lane, after a military deployment to find the HOA president, a Miss Karen Pendleton, attempting to illegally auction off my home, vehicles, and all personal belongings. I believe several felonies are in progress. The dispatcher, to her credit, didn't even blink. Are you in a safe location, sir? Is anyone armed? Armed with a clipboard and a disturbing level of entitlement, I muttered. I'm standing on my front lawn, which is currently an unauthorized auction site. The primary instigator is unarmed, but dangerously delusional. Karen, now flushed with panic and fury, sputtered like a tea kettle. Officer, this man is trespassing. He abandoned this property. He's clearly unstable. Even the auctioneer had gone quiet, Mike hissing faintly in the background. The crowd was shifting now, sensing something bigger than a bargain. Then, the sound. A siren. Growing louder. And Karen? She looked like someone had just poured ice water down her spine. The first patrol car rolled up, lights strobing red and blue through the gray afternoon. Two officers stepped out, a weathered veteran, Officer Miller, and his younger, visibly uncomfortable partner, Officer Davies. Karen launched straight into her act. Officers, thank goodness you're here, she cried, pointing a shaking finger. This man is Sergeant Mason, a former resident. He abandoned his property months ago and hasn't paid dues in over a year. This auction is fully legal under HOA bylaws. He's trespassing and causing a public disturbance. She even managed to conjure a tear. Oscar-worthy stuff, if the judges were blind and deaf. Miller turned to me. Calm, unreadable. Sir, your side of this? I handed over everything, my military ID, driver's license with the address, deployment orders, and the letter from my CO confirming my status. Then, just for good measure, I opened my banking app to show 12 straight months of on-time HOA payments. "Officer," I said, measured and direct. "I'm Sergeant Alex Mason. This is my home. I've been on active duty. My dues are current." Miss Pendleton was notified of my deployment in writing. "There has been no abandonment. This auction is not only unauthorized, it's criminal." Davies looked like he was sweating through his shirt. Officer Miller reviewed the documents, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "do you have copies of the foreclosure notice? Proof of service? Payment records?" Karen's complexion shifted from pink to purple. "Well, yes, of course. At the HOA office. This is highly irregular. He's trying to intimidate us." The procedure for foreclosing on an active duty service member without a court order or an SCRA waiver, I cut in loud enough for the crowd to hear, is a federal crime. Miller nodded. "Sergeant Mason is correct. Miss Pendleton, this auction is to cease immediately. All property is to be returned to the premises. And I suggest you contact an attorney." The auctioneer didn't wait to be told twice. He started waving at his crew. Bargain hunters dispersed, some muttering, others staring at Karen like they just realized they were following the wrong leader. Karen, ever the dramatist, tried one last gasp. "This is an outrage. You haven't heard the last of this, Sergeant Mason. The HOA will pursue this." "Great," I said. "Just remember to bring a real lawyer next time. Not a clipboard." The officer stayed until my furniture was returned, scuffed but intact. "The Ducati? Say, the truck? Still mine." Officer Miller handed me a card. "If she gives you any more trouble, Sergeant, call me directly. And change your locks." Solid advice. As the cruiser pulled away, neighbors began to appear, like wary animals after a storm. Mrs. Henderson, the kindly rose gardener from across the street, approached with cookies like she'd summoned them from thin air. "Alex dear," she said, all warmth and subtle steel. "Thank heavens you're back. That woman's been circling your place like a vulture since the day you left." Another neighbor, David, quiet and thoughtful, offered to help move things inside. He mentioned seeing vans at the house a few days earlier, Karen supervising like a heist, and even showed me photos. Smart man. Possibly a future witness. Inside, the chaos was more personal. Closets open. Drawers rifled through. A few small valuables, gone. My grandfather's antique maps. His service medals. Things that mattered. That night, after changing the locks and accepting every cookie Mrs. Henderson handed over, I sat at my dining table. Same table they tried to sell. Laptop open. Focus locked in. This wasn't about revenge. This was recon. Retaliation by the book. Karen had declared war. And now, Operation HOA Takedown had begun. That right there was Karen's second monumental mistake. She thought I was just a soldier. She forgot soldiers are also trained to fight. The moment I discovered the forged signature, something clicked, like someone had jammed an adrenaline needle straight into my chest. This wasn't just about getting my stuff back or curbing Karen's petty power trip. This was about dismantling a fraudulent operation from the ground up. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I was on the phone searching for legal counsel. Someone who didn't flinch at HOA bluster, who understood the weight of an SCRA violation, and who knew how to draw legal blood. That man was Arthur Davenport, a semi-retired attorney with a pitbull reputation for surgically tearing corrupt HOAs limb from limb. His consultation was free. His time, I quickly realized, was not. I laid out my story in full. Military orders, bank statements, the official deployment letter, photos from the attempted auction, and the piece de resistance, the forged waiver Karen had conveniently stashed in the HOA's online portal. Davenport's bushy eyebrows, initially lifted in polite skepticism, slowly lowered into a predator's V. "Sergeant Mason," he rumbled, Most people come to me with anger and no evidence. You brought me a goddamn dossier. This woman isn't just a tyrant. She's reckless, and very, very stupid to have targeted a service member. You took the case. Our first move? A cease and desist letter so sharp it probably peeled paint off Karen's mailbox. It demanded immediate return of any stolen property, full access to HOA records related to my account and the so-called foreclosure, and a complete halt to any further action against me. We also hit them with formal notice regarding SCRA violations and the forged document, now potential grounds for both civil and criminal liability. But Davenport had a hunch. Karen hadn't acted alone. You don't fake a foreclosure and stage an auction without help. She'd need the board, at least the treasurer and secretary, to sign off on something like this, he muttered. Let's find out who her enablers are. Enter Mrs. Henderson, Maple Creek's Walking Intelligence Network. She happily gave us names. Bartholomew Barty Higgins, treasurer, nervous, overly polite, always looked like he was about to apologize for breathing. Agnes Periwinkle, secretary, mousy, conflict-averse, and terrified of Karen. Davenport and I initiated a more formal evidence-gathering mission. We issued legal demands for all HOA minutes from the past year, full financials, and every scrap of correspondence related to my property. Their newly hired, visibly overwhelmed HOA attorney tried to stall, citing procedural complexity and internal privacy concerns. Davenport cut through the noise like a scalpel. While the legal gears turned, I did my own reconnaissance. I walked the neighborhood. Some folks still looked over their shoulders, afraid of Karen's wrath. But others, emboldened by the fact that I wasn't backing down, started opening up. One neighbor told me how Karen had fined them repeatedly for a front door that was the wrong shade of blue, even though it was on the pre-approved color list. Another was charged for leaving a kid's bike on their own patio, twice in 1 week. Patterns emerged: vindictive enforcement, inconsistent penalties, and power wielded like a cudgel. Karen wasn't taking my resistance well. She launched a petty counteroffensive, hand-delivered violation notices, passed to me by a nervous teenager she clearly paid minimum wage. Violations included improperly parked vehicle, my own truck in my own driveway, unapproved landscaping alterations, tire divots left by her auction crew, and the piece de ridicule, failure to obtain prior written approval for unscheduled return from military deployment. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. I cataloged each notice and handed them to Davenport, who added them to our growing file titled Evidence of Targeted Harassment and HOA Misconduct. But the real breakthrough? That came from a forgotten corner of tech. Before I deployed, I'd installed 2 discrete, cloud-connected security cameras, one covering the front porch and driveway, the other angled at the side garage access. I'd nearly forgotten about them. One late night, fueled by bad coffee and raw determination, I logged into the cloud. And there it was. Timestamp, 3 days before my return. Footage showed Karen herself, flanked by Barty Higgins, standing on my front porch. Barty held a bundle of documents, likely the foreclosure paperwork. Karen gestured at my mailbox, stuffed full with mail Mrs. Henderson hadn't collected yet. She theatrically pretended to attempt delivery, then pulled the papers back out, shook her head, and whispered to Barty, lips clearly mouthing, "See? Undeliverable. He's abandoned it." Then, captured in perfect profile, she said, clear enough to read with some freeze frame and zoom, "This will go so smoothly. Sergeant Mason won't even know what hit him. And the proceeds from this abandoned property? They'll finally fund my community beautification project." Barty looked horrified. He nodded anyway. I stared at the screen, stunned. Her beautification project? Agnes Periwinkle later confirmed, after Davenport sent her a firm but polite letter outlining her potential legal liability, that Karen's grand plan involved a marble bird bath imported from Italy and award-winning exotic petunias for her own backyard. I backed up the video. Twice. Then again. Saved copies to 3 different drives. Emailed one to Davenport with the subject line, "Christmas came early." He called 10 minutes later. Voice low, giddy with focused rage. "Sergeant," he said, "I believe we just found our smoking gun. Or in this case, our smoking bird bath." With that footage, Davenport declared it was time to switch from defense to offense. "She thinks she's untouchable," he said, tapping the printouts. "Time to confront her on her turf, right in front of the homeowners." We drafted a formal request to be added to the agenda of the next HOA general meeting, citing urgent matters involving potential financial misconduct and governance violations. Karen tried to block us, of course. Claimed the agenda was already full, that our concerns were unsubstantiated and disruptive. Davenport hit back with their own bylaws, quoting the clause that allowed any homeowner in good standing, which I now demonstrably was, to petition the board for time with adequate notice. She was cornered. He also had a quiet word with Agnes Periwinkle, gently explaining the consequences of knowingly enabling fraud, especially when it involved forged documents and violations of federal protections for active duty personnel. Agnes, to her credit, paled to the color of uncooked oatmeal and promised to ensure the matter was added to the agenda. In the days before the meeting, word spread like wildfire. Thanks largely to Mrs. Henderson, our unofficial town crier, the entire neighborhood knew a reckoning was coming. The atmosphere shifted. Neighbors who once whispered behind closed blinds were now openly trading stories about Karen's iron-fisted reign. Karen tried to act unbothered. Sent out a snippy newsletter about trash cans. No one cared. And then, the night came. The community clubhouse, usually host to sleepy potlucks and underattended zoning votes, was packed. Extra chairs, people standing shoulder to shoulder. The air crackled with tension. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by a sweat-drenched Barty and an invisible Agnes. She tried to open with her usual droning about gutter maintenance, but the crowd wasn't having it. When she finally, grudgingly, announced the agenda items submitted by Mr. Davenport and Sergeant Mason, the room fell quiet. Davenport and I stood, flash drive in hand, receipts in tow, and a neighborhood, at long last, ready to listen. Facing the board, I began. My voice was calm, steady, measured. I laid out the facts, my service record, my deployment, the auto-drafted dues payments, and the complete lack of any legitimate communication from the HOA. I projected copies of my military orders and bank statements onto the screen we'd brought with us. A ripple of murmurs moved through the packed room. Then Mr. Davenport stood. He was calm, almost academic, but his words hit like precision-guided missiles. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association," he began, "what Sergeant Mason has described is deeply troubling. But it is, I'm afraid, only the beginning." He proceeded to dismantle Karen's entire narrative, point by point. He cited Virginia law on HOA foreclosures, highlighted clear violations of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, walked through the evidence of forgery, the fake waiver supposedly signed by me. He explained everything in layman's terms, translating legalese into outrage. Bartholomew went pale. Agnes was visibly trembling. Karen, though, clung to her facade, arms crossed, mouth drawn in a defiant sneer. "This is slander. We followed proper protocols," she snapped, a little too loud, a little too shrill. "Protocols, Miss Pendleton?" Davenport said, his voice turning silk. "Let's talk about protocols." He nodded to me. My cue. I clicked the remote. The footage began. The clubhouse fell silent as the security camera feed flickered to life. Karen on my porch. Bartholomew beside her, visibly uncomfortable. Karen theatrically stuffing papers into my full mailbox, then pulling them back out. Then the close-up. Lips clearly mouthing. "He'll never know what hit him. Proceeds go to the Special Community Beautification Project." The room gasped. Karen's jaw fell open. Her face drained from angry puce to corpse pale. Bartholomew looked ready to sink through the floor. Even the other board members, previously silent, complicit, now stared at the screen like it was a slow-motion car crash they couldn't look away from. Karen tried to recover. "That footage is doctored. It's fake." "He's framing me," she shrieked, pointing at me with a shaking hand. But no one believed her. The image she'd cultivated, Karen Pendleton, pillar of the community, was dissolving before everyone's eyes. The silence afterward was suffocating. Finally, Mr. Davenport broke it. His voice low, clear, lethal. "Ms. Pendleton, accusing us of falsifying evidence is a serious claim. Fortunately, we have the original unedited cloud recording, complete with metadata, ready to submit to authorities. Should this escalate to a criminal investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and federal violations, I'm confident it will hold up quite well." He let that hang. Bartholomew choked on what sounded like a dying squirrel. Agnes looked like she might faint. The rest of the board members, retirees mostly, turned from Karen to us, faces blanching with sudden understanding. And then, like a spark in dry brush, the crowd broke. It started as murmurs, then voices rose. Mr. Abernathy, who never spoke, stood up and said, "She fined me $500 because my grandson's tricycle was visible from the street. For 2 hours." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up next. "She tried to tear down our kid's treehouse. Said it violated airspace covenants. It's been there for 10 years. One by one, neighbors stood and told their stories. Exorbitant fines. Arbitrary citations. Personal grudges enforced as policy. Karen tried to shout them down. Order. This isn't a grievance forum." But her authority had evaporated. She wasn't the feared queen of Maple Creek anymore. She was just a woman in a too-tight beige pantsuit, cornered and exposed. Davenport waited for quiet. Then he stepped forward again, holding up a document. "Given the evidence and the clear will of this community," he said, "we have several formal demands." He read them aloud, each one slicing through the room like a blade. Immediate resignation of Karen Pendleton as HOA president and board member. Immediate resignation of Bartholomew Higgins as treasurer and board member. A full independent forensic audit of HOA finances during Pendleton's tenure. A formal written apology to Sergeant Mason for the illegal foreclosure, property seizure, and reputational harm. Full restitution to Sergeant Mason, including legal fees, replacement value of missing items, and compensation for the violation of his rights under federal law. He turned to the remaining board. "And we strongly advise the reversal of any fines or liens issued under Ms. Pendleton's administration that cannot be clearly justified." There was a long pause. Then Henderson, no relation to my kind neighbor, cleared his throat. "Karen, I think, in light of everything, maybe you should consider stepping down." His voice was barely audible, but in that clubhouse, it landed like a gunshot. Karen stared at him. Then at me. Her face twisted, rage, disbelief, humiliation. For a second I thought she might throw her clipboard. Instead, she grabbed her purse, let out a strangled animalistic shriek, and stormed out of the room, nearly bowling over Mrs. Henderson, who stood near the door with a faint smile of satisfaction. Bartholomew scribbled something on a napkin, his resignation presumably, and scurried after her like a scolded lapdog. Agnes just nodded mutely through her tears. The reign of Karen Pendleton was over. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It exhaled. A long, collective breath of relief. The aftermath came fast. The board, now terrified of legal fallout, complied with every one of our demands. A temporary leadership committee was formed including, to my amused surprise, Mrs. Henderson, who accepted the role with a gleam in her eye and a vow for sensible gardening and absolutely no beige. The audit? Worse than we'd imagined. Karen and Bartholomew had been embezzling for years. Landscaping overages funneled into Karen's private account. Consulting fees paid to Bartholomew's fake LLC. Emergency repair invoices for work that never happened. The so-called beautification project? Just the tip of the iceberg. With Mr. Davenport leading the charge, the HOA filed a civil suit against them. The county prosecutor began exploring criminal charges. My personal settlement was substantial. The SCRA violations alone carried serious penalties. And the emotional toll of losing irreplaceable heirlooms, my grandfather's medals, antique maps, was acknowledged in the restitution. Karen had to sell her oversized house, the one with the now infamous petunia patch, to pay her legal bills. Last I heard, she was renting a cramped apartment on the far side of town. Her dreams of imported bird baths were long dead. Bartholomew predictably flipped. Cooperated in full for a lighter penalty. But his reputation was ash. As for me, life eventually returned to normal. Or rather, a new version of it. The community held a proper welcome home barbecue in my honor. Mrs. Henderson brought the best damn apple pie I've ever had. The new board quickly scrapped the draconian bylaws and replaced them with simple, transparent policies. The atmosphere in Maple Creek shifted, from silent resentment to real neighborliness. I even helped set up a secure digital record system to ensure no future Karen could manipulate things behind closed doors. Looking back now, the absurdity still floors me. Karen saw a soldier and assumed absence meant opportunity. She mistook silence for weakness. She forgot that soldiers are trained to assess threats, gather intel, and execute precision operations. Turns out, those skills translate beautifully to suburban warfare. Her downfall was poetic. She tried to bend the rules, and ended up buried beneath them. So what's the takeaway? Keep records. Know your rights. Read your HOA bylaws. Yes, even the boring ones. And never, ever assume the quiet guy in combat boots is an easy mark. Sometimes the fiercest battles aren't fought overseas. Sometimes they're right in your front yard, against a tyrant with a clipboard and too much beige. Want to hear more stories of people who picked a fight with the wrong person? Hit that subscribe button. You never know what craziness life, or your HO, will throw at you next.